Wonderful. All right. Hello and welcome everybody. It's wonderful to have everyone here today, an intimate group today. Today it's our final session, part of our research mentoring series, and it's on dissemination channels, focusing on peer-reviewed journals. Our Ascot Learn Design SIG is collaborating with our community mentoring program to offer this. Now, my name's Leanne Ngol, along with my co-conveners, Kashmira, we've got Keith, and we also have Kate Mitchell, will be hosting today's session. Um, just to, Before we go into handing over to our special guest, Henk, our Ascalite Learning Design Special Interest Group, just a bit of awareness in terms of what we do across the year. We do want to obviously promote our Ascalite conference coming up. It's fantastic, event across our industry sector around this to meeting a lot of people who are interested in educational technology, learning designers, and those who are passionate about teaching and learning in general. So please do feel free to reach out, get in contact. Our group, we're here to connect, share our practice, uplift, and support one another across the learning design industry. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining here from the Bunurong land of the Kulin Nations, and also, respect that they are our traditional custodians on the land in which we are joining here today. And I pay respects to our elders past and present and emerging. For me, acknowledgement of country is also about recognizing connection to country and to our community and also to one another, and the various diversity and cultural insights that we all bring. And it's particularly fitting for this session today as we share our knowledge and learn from one another. Now, I do want to introduce you to Henk Hauser. Today, we have a wonderful session on disseminating our discussions and topic on peer-reviewed journals, especially on AGET journal, which is a high-ranking journal across the particular discipline. Heaps of experience, Henk. I think most of the people here actually do know you. I'm looking at the list of participants today.
Next slide.
We are certainly grateful to have you here. Talking a bit about the process of peer review journals, because part of our dissemination channel topics in our mentoring program, which is focused on professionals or early career academics in the third space area, wanting to know what is involved in research around that. And we've spoken in the past around dissemination across conferences, blogs, whether it's professional identity around that. And this is a key area in peer review journals as one of the, subtle research areas that they can look at disseminating. And it's really coming down to what is peer review journals, the process around that. I don't think anything's, sacred, etc. But I'm sure what you're going to say about this will help us discover more about this particular area. So what we're going to do is pass it over to Hank to do a bit of presentation around this particular topic, and also invite everyone here to engage in the chat. There will be opportunities for Q&A at the end. Thank you. Thanks, Hank.
Cool. Thanks, Leanne. And thank you for the invite. Hang on. I'll just make sure that this is shared. All right. You can see all this. Very good. So, yeah, thanks for inviting me. I realized I was here last year as well, talking about very similar stuff. Kashmira gave me a bunch of topics to address, some questions, so I will do that. I do know most of you, and I do kind of collaborative stuff with many of you. But for those of you who don't know me, I work in PET's Academy of Learning and Teaching, and I manage a small team of academic developers. It's nice to have a team, Kashmir, rather than being the only one. So yeah, I also I'm a co-lead editor of of AJET, the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology. I'm an associate editor for the International Journal for Academic Development as well. And I'm kind of like, this is kind of a leftover thing, um, but I'm still an associate editor for the Journal of Peer Learning too, because that almost folded at some stage. And so I was involved in the transition period to a new platform. And so that's now doing well and up and running. So I'm very happy about that. It's a much lighter workload than AJET, I should say. I will acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera people as the First Nations owners of these unceded lands. I'm in Meanjin on the banks of Maiwa, the Brisbane River. And I'll extend that acknowledgement to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room as well. Okay, so just a little bit of an overview of the current landscape. I was talking to Leanne and Kashmir about this earlier. Um, we are dealing with an enormous increase in submissions to academic journals. There's a bunch of reasons for this, but it's particularly relevant to an AI, you know, it's kind of like the elephant in the room here. But yeah, it's particularly relevant to educational technology, of course, because there's many papers that get submitted that are about AI as well. So these are the kind of numbers that we're currently looking at. And yeah, it's hard to, we have constant discussions around like sustainability of this. How are we going to keep managing this? Because it is like exponential. Um, we currently have 26 associate editors, and Kashmir is one of those. Um, and as you know, Kashmira, um, yeah, we put a lot of pressure on those associate editors. So each of them is currently sitting on about 8 or 9, sometimes up to 10 papers that they're handling at any point in time and trying to find reviewers for. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because it has a direct impact on what happens when you submit a paper to AJET, for example. So it's really important to kind of make a good first impression, shall I say. And then you need to have a paper of substance as well, because any kind of weakness and it just gets rejected. It gets sometimes desk rejected by us in most cases, as in the co-lead editors. We all do triaging. Um, so we look at it if there's any problem with the methodology, if there's any problem with the conceptual framework, um, if there's any problem with the scope of it, we reject it straight off. And I should say we decline. We're using the word decline instead of reject to be a bit nicer about it. Um, Yeah, and then it goes to an associate editor. So the associate editor then has an in-depth read of it. Um, and at that point it can still get declined if there are problems. Yeah. All right, so this is kind of like the impact of Gen AI. Like it has a huge impact on the submission rates. From a journal editor point of view, it creates issues at the triaging part. So when you first read, we get a lot of submissions now that read really well initially. Like so they are correctly formatted, all the referencing is correct. So all the usual or the traditional signs that say there's something wrong with this paper are no longer there, which makes the process of identifying, doing the first kind of cut a lot harder. Like it takes more time because there's a lot of papers that sound pretty good. And then when you start reading, you kind of go like, okay, there's something not quite right here. Yeah. Um, so that's part of it. So that's the kind of AI impact in writing the papers themselves. And, because a lot of people, and this is perfectly acceptable, by the way, it helps if to improve your writing. And so that's the way it's used, and that's perfectly fine, to help with readability. Um, there's another aspect to this, which is that there are a lot of papers about AI itself. And so many of them do very similar things. And so we have lots and lots of. So this editorial that we wrote at the beginning of the year was basically about that. Like, are there certain things in terms of research topics related to AI that are kind of reaching saturation point? Because there are a lot of framework papers like that develop AI frameworks, often related to assessment. There are a lot of technology acceptance studies, by which I mean like studies that ask academics uh, or students whether they would use AI or whether they're planning to use AI, and they're all pretty much the same, and the results are pretty much the same. So they have, and there've been quite a lot of papers published about this. So they're kind of like reaching a point of that they have nothing new to say. Um, yeah, I'll pause for a sec because we're with a fairly small group. So if you have, and Kate's here as well. Hello, Kate. Um, are there any questions at this point, or something that you want me to expand on a little? No? All right, I'll carry on. Um, so this is a little bit about what makes, this is just kind of general advice, and it's mostly about structure. Um, so these are kind of like individual things to focus on. So I should say as well, in terms of saturation, we also receive an enormous lot of systematic reviews or scoping reviews. And I know the reason for this. Well, one of the reasons for this is that a lot of PhD students like to get their first paper out as a scoping review, which is there's nothing inherently wrong with it, except that a lot of these papers have very little new to add. They're essentially just a lit review to identify what the gap in the research is. But we've seen so many of these that it's hard to, like, you really have to, for a scoping review to get published now, or a systematic review, you really have to have something new to say or something that is not covered already. And when it comes to AI related topics, that is really hard because there are many of these now. The same goes for conceptual papers. We do publish conceptual papers, but they have they really do need to have something new to say. So it can't just be your own musings on whatever you're interested in, It does have to have you do have to demonstrate that it's pushing the field into a new direction, or it's doing something in a theoretical sense that really hasn't been done before. But most papers that we receive, and most, this is probably most relevant to you, are research studies, which involve data. And this is the kind of structure that is normal. And it helps you to kind of identify what the size of each section, which is again, these are not like rigid rules, but they do make for a good um, structured, well-structured paper, usually. Um, I should say as well at this point that like a lot of we get papers and less so, like I said before, but we get papers that just haven't submissions that just haven't read the author guidelines. And it's a really easy thing to do to read the author guidelines. For example, like what is the word limit? You know, the word limit for AJET is 8,000. That's all inclusive. So that includes the reference list. We get papers that are like 15,000. And you can't go like, you know, so we send it straight back. Like, if if it looks like it could be an interesting paper, we do send it back and say, just reduce this to 8,000, and then we'll have another look at it. In some cases, and this has happened on a number of occasions, it comes back within an hour, and all of a sudden it's 8,000 words, which is funny. It kind of raises a few red flags, of course. I will then have a very careful look at how they've done that and whether there are any references that don't exist, those kinds of things. Um, yeah, and the same goes for, you know, anonymizing. These are all very straightforward things that you really have no excuse not to follow the instructions. Did you have your hand up, Kashmira?
Yes, I was just saying, like, eh, in rare circumstances, but we do negotiate word limit. Yeah. So, could you please just talk about that?
Yeah, when I said before about systematic reviews, you can go up to 10,000. But like I said, it has to be, yeah, it has to be a very interesting topic, and it has to have something new to say. But because you're looking at a lot of references, usually, we do allow for a bit more for those. But they are exceptions. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
So these are this is an editorial that we published a couple of years ago, and it's still very much relevant. So these are the main reasons why we desk reject papers. The main one is journal aims and scope. And so it's it's educational technology in a tertiary context. This is in the guidelines. This is in the submission guidelines. But there are quite a few people that submit papers that relate to secondary or primary education, which, you know, is not within scope, essentially. And then there's no contribution to the field. Like when we say no contribution to the field, that also includes very limited contribution to the field. You do really have to demonstrate what your contribution to the field is and how you add to that, which involves having a bit of an idea of where the field is at. And it really helps in that sense if you're aware of what's been published in AJET in the last, I don't know, couple of issues, for example, or the last year or so. Because it just shows that you're kind of aware of the context in which you're trying to publish. That again, that's not a strict rule. Like we publish quite a few papers that have no references to AJET articles because it's not a requirement. But I find that it often helps, particularly for papers who have nothing to contribute because it's already been done. And so you have to, if you do the kinds of papers that have case studies, for example, that are very clearly situated in a national context, and we do get quite a few of those, there's nothing wrong with that. But you do have to write it in a way that you address an international audience. So you do have to explain enough about the context that people all over the world can understand what that context means, that it's transferable. And the same applies to your conclusions and implications section. You have to kind of indicate how this might be relevant in other contexts. Okay.
Sorry, I was coughing. I
Ah,
forgot I
that's all
wasn't
right.
on mute.
That's all good. Um, yeah, methodology and methods is a real key, um, because that's the kind of basis of academic scientific publishing. If if you do a research study, you're sharing this with your peers, it has to be reproducible, right? And so your methods and methodology section is about justifying what methods you've used and how it might be reproduced by someone else doing exactly the same thing. So that's really important. And some people kind of skirt over it and have a very small methodology section. Um, and yeah, that usually leads to a decline of the paper because we just don't know what they've done and why they've done it in that way. There are some methods that are a little outdated. Um, so that's another reason. And then there's basic mistakes, and this applies particularly to quantitative studies. Um, and yes, that's not my strength, so I usually pass that on to other editors. But there are basic things that, and we have many associate editors with um, lots of expertise in that area. So yeah, people check whether the statistics make sense and whether they're properly reported on and whether the correct processes have been followed to get to the conclusions that they get to. So yeah, if there's mistakes in that, that's a kind of immediate decline of the paper. All right. So we've got a few. I was saying before to Kashmira and Leanne, we have a few editorials over the years that are guidelines around particular areas of publication. One that's coming up, and this is issue 3 this year, which will come out either tomorrow or the day after, or otherwise Monday at the very latest. Um, but the editorial is about titles and how to create a good, impactful title for educational research, technology research, which is interesting. I wasn't when and Linda Corin, my colleague, she she suggested doing an editorial on this, and I was kind of wondering, like, when we started, like, can you actually write a whole editorial about titles? And yes, you can, because there's lots of studies done on this, which is quite interesting. And they've kind of like the types of titles people use, and then the impact that has on citations and downloads. Yeah, interesting. So keep an eye out for that. That will be announced in the next couple of days. But this editorial here is about abstracts. And the abstracts are actually really important because when I say we're triaging a lot of papers, the abstract is the first thing that we read. If in the abstract it looks like there's no indication of what methods are being used, there's no clear indication of the scope of the paper, there's no idea about the results, then that already frames how you're then going to read the rest of the paper, because then you have to go and look for those things. And there should be indications in the abstract, if that makes sense. All right, so that editorial will give you quite a lot of detailed guidelines around what makes a good abstract. So this is the kind of process, and I've kind of covered this probably. So we do a triage thing as lead editors. And then it goes to, and then we assign it. If we think it's good enough at first sight, then we assign it to an associate editor. They then do an in-depth review. So they read it very carefully. Um, they usually come back to me and say, there is something wrong with the methodology here, and this is what's wrong with it. At that point, I will decline it in the system, taking on board their comments. Or sometimes they do it themselves, but yeah, it's most of the time, and hopefully it will then go out for review. It's hard to find reviewers, so any of you who want to be reviewers, please let us know. And Kashmira knows this as well. You sometimes have more than 10, 12 attempts at getting people to review. There's a lot of declines, and it's for the same reasons that we talked about before. Everyone is under a lot of pressure, high workloads, except for Keith. Sorry, Keith. And then if there's two different reviews, we sometimes go to a third reviewer. And sometimes it's very clear as an associate editor what the associate editor agrees with or which reviewer the associate editor agrees with. And so they can make a decision around that as well, or they decide to take it to a third reviewer. And then there's round 2 and sometimes round 3. It's very unlikely, but not impossible. It's very unlikely that if you get to round 2, that it won't get published. I should say again that is not a rule. In the Journal for Academic Development, we declined a paper a couple of weeks ago that I was involved in at round 3, and the reason was the reviewer. The feedback basically wasn't addressed enough. And after 2 rounds of trying to get the authors to address the feedback, we decided that it's not our role to keep doing that. And so we declined it at that point, which is rare. It's very rare. Because most people, and this is a piece of advice as well, address all the feedback thoroughly and indicate how you've done it. And if you really think that you don't need to address, or if you think that the reviewer is wrong about something, that's fine as well. But you still have to say why you think that. And yeah. All right. The reviewer 2 thing is, is something that we, as an editorial team, talk about a lot because reviews have become, there's a significant increase in declines, in rejections by reviewers. There's also a significant increase that we've noticed over the last couple of years of reviewers being very, very harsh. And not very nice about it in some cases. So as associate editors, we can adjust the reviews, and we do sometimes do that as well. Like we edit them a bit so that we take out the kind of, the horrible stuff. basically. Um, we have tried to, and we are still talking about this, but to do some reviewer workshops. Um, the problem with those is that it's really hard. It's a bit like um, doing professional development for academic staff sometimes. You get people who don't really need it to come along, right? So reviewer workshops tend to attract people who are already pretty good reviewers. So the ones that are problematic don't tend to come along to these. But from an author point of view, when you get a review that is that seems harsh, just take a bit of time to and step back from it, you know, do a bit of swearing in your own space and don't respond until you've had a bit of time to digest. That's just yeah, because we do get like I mean I reject we decline a lot of papers, and sometimes I get an immediate email back from someone who's really angry about it, and it's not very pleasant. It's also not very wise. And then others do exactly the opposite, which is really nice. They say like, "Oh, thank you so much for that constructive feedback, and I hope we can work on this and in the future submit another paper to AJET." And that's really nice to hear. So it's yeah. Um, But the angry response is not a good idea. And take critique seriously because oftentimes, even though initially you feel really angry about it and you feel personally attacked, and it's perfectly normal to feel that, if you reflect on it a bit, it often helps you to actually improve the paper a lot, in my experience. And doing some reviewing yourself is a good idea always as well, because it helps you to kind of get a feel for what gets submitted in a particular journal. Um, yeah, and what the kind of standard or quality is, however you want to call that. But this is just a bit of general advice. The birds have nothing to do with any of this, but I kind of like taking photos of birds. Um, So collaborate with more experienced researchers is always a good idea. Many of us are third space workers. So, we work with academics who are often experienced researchers. So particularly for scholarship of teaching and learning kind of projects, if you can collaborate with academics, it's always a good idea. It's a good way of um, you know, yeah, it's a good way to build a reputation for yourself as well in the process. Um, be humble and be rigorous. And by be humble, I mean, don't overstate the importance of your paper. Like, just be clear about what your contribution is, but don't make it sound as if, you've just solved all the problems related to educational technology. Um, We were talking earlier about critical friends, very important. And so conferences are a good way of getting initial feedback on a project that you may then develop into a journal article. Um, so yeah, that's and yeah, but also like just use your network. Ask people, you know. They can always say, no, I'm too busy. But if they're not, you get a bit of good feedback before it goes to um, external review. Always a good idea. I've talked about submission guidelines, very important. Be patient and polite throughout the process is really important as well, because particularly the patient thing at the moment, I showed you the stats in the beginning of what we're dealing with. In AJET, in particular, we're all volunteers. So we have this is an enormous workload that we don't actually get paid to do. So and I do realize that people get impatient. And I mentioned earlier PhD students, and this is kind of the tragedy of it. Like some, particularly because there's an increase in PhD by publication, which means there's pressure on timelines. And so, they need to get their papers published at a particular point in time to graduate or to, submit their thesis. Um, we can't we can't jump queues. And so we get a lot of requests for like, oh, can you just fast track this for me because my deadline is this? And it's like, no, we cannot. Sorry. Yeah. There are other journals that charge fees, um, and that are a lot faster in processing articles. So, there is that, but that's a choice. I don't personally think that we should be paying for papers to get published, but not everyone agrees. And so once you get published, like have a bit of a celebration, and then promote it a bit as well, because you can be very proud. Like the rejection rates are enormous. When I say like we received 2,600, that's what we're tracking for submissions per year. We publish 6 issues per year. Um, and so each issue has between 8 and 10 papers. So you do the maths, what happens to all the others? It's hard to get published in a Q1 journal. So when you do, take a bit of time to reflect on that and pat yourself on the back. All right. Any questions? That was almost 40 minutes, Leanne. So
Mhm.
yeah, we do have some
Thank
time for
you. Thank you for that.
questions.
We're just going to now open the floor for questions, but I know people have been engaging in the chat area. I'm just kind of curious, Hank, given the fourfold increase in the number of submissions going through, wonder if you're willing to share, like how much volunteer time do you actually seriously, dedicate, given that you're the first triage in the editorial team to,
Yeah, crazy,
yeah,
crazily. And like, yeah, and that's what I mean. We are kind of struggling with that. I
mm,
spent probably, I'm an early riser, so I wake up at 5.
mm,
So I do
mm,
this before I get to work kind of thing.
mm,
I probably triage about 4 or 5 papers per day.
mm,
And that takes at least an hour and
mm,
usually more, depending on, because you want to give it sufficient
mm,
time.
mm.
But yeah,
That's
it's a
fantastic.
heavy workload. So
It's quite a lot.
I mean, we
Mm,
are talking about ways of making that more sustainable. So, we've been thinking about AI tools, like
mm,
is there a way of sifting through this and identifying papers that are out of scope, but you still have to make a judgment. Like
mm,
I don't want to fully rely on that to reject papers
mm.
because people put a
Yeah.
lot of effort into it.
Mm,
There are
absolutely.
ones that are very straightforward. Like,
Mm,
there's papers that are 2,000 words,
mm,
and just have dot pointed results or something.
mm,
And it's like, no, that we don't do that. So that's straight away, you know, papers
mm,
should be between 5 and 8,000 words.
mm.
So I kind of like those because they're like quick, to triage.
Um,
Um, but yeah, no, it is a lot of time.
Mm.
mm,
And I don't know. Kashmira, you can probably say as an associate editor how much time you spend,
Mm,
roughly.
yeah, a lot. So I have a calendar, time always. Every Friday morning I do that before I get to work. So that's like early morning. I don't wake up very early, unfortunately, but yeah, I go through if I have been allocated new papers first, because new paper means I got to read the paper first before I get to anything. But there are other kind of thing which is apart from reading, just finding out which papers are rejected. Like somebody, I have asked them to review and they declined, so I have to find another one. Uh, Sometimes, and not like always, but like often, they get a lot of requests from different editors, like associate editors, and someone one day came, like emailed me and saying, you don't even look at what my expertise are, and you are sending me papers for reviews. And I said, no, that's not how it works, because what happens is that because that we know, over time we know that some people are good at some kind of papers, so reviewers, so we find it. But then at times they are already reviewing 4 or 5 papers, so we don't load them. So what I do is sometimes, okay, I choose two, where one is content expert and one is only methodology expert, which may not know about content, but they can know about it. So I had to then go explain them. Sometimes I decline and people come back and say, I'm very disappointed because you declined on this basis. So if they have doubts that this like fair, it's not fair, then I get it re-reviewed, or I contact my editors and say, I want like third, fourth, whatever opinion around whether the decision was rightly made, so that they're up to their satisfaction. So those kind of things happen sometimes, which takes time as well. So my average work on this weekly is 3 hours plus, I guess.
Mm.
Very interesting. And look, I think there was a couple of comments about potentially those who may be interested in becoming a reviewer, and I'm only seeing negatives and workload. But what are some of the benefits? Like, why do you do what you do? I
I,
think just perhaps share that, um, yeah, experience around. I mean, I understand contributing to the, field and, collegiality, but I'll be
mm,
interested to, hear why do you do what you do? What are some of the benefits of becoming a reviewer? Probably growing up to become Hank, the editorial leadership stage, etc. What are some benefits around that? Yeah.
I I can answer that, Leanne.
Yeah,
mm,
okay.
I think I've done 5 or 6 reviews this year, for AJET, just for AJET. Um, and usually it's Kashmira knocking on my door and sending me the email, but not always. And I've declined a couple, mostly just because I felt they were completely out of my area. But someone told me, and I can't remember who it was, otherwise I'd give them a shout out. But I had a bit of a mindset, where I saw reviewing as one of the things that you have to do as an academic. But this person said, no, no, you've got to think about it as a almost a professional development opportunity, right? You're going to read some possibly really good research, and learn something about that. You're going to be exposed to methodological approaches that you may or may not be familiar with and learn something about them as well. And you're also going to have the opportunity to sharpen your critical faculties by engaging with research and thinking about, whether this is, a justifiable piece of work. And since I've thought about it like that, I do more reviews and less kind of reading. So I found it to be, really, really helpful. And just following up from what you said, Hank, any journal that charges and asks me to review, especially any journal that charges and asks me to review within 7 days, it's just an
mm-hmm,
automatic decline. I refuse to
yeah.
do that.
Mm,
Yeah, I think Keith, what you said is like, and apart from that, you learn to write good way of feedback, because sometimes the papers have nothing and then you have to tell them what is lacking. So it's a very structured way of providing feedback as well. But for me, primary reason is that I believe that education and professional development should be open and free. So I will not even spend a minute for the journal who is charging anybody. So AJET does not charge for publishing and or making it available for anybody to read. I think that is my primary kind of like ethos, because it is aligning with what I believe, that it should be free and open. So yeah.
Yeah, that's nice, and I agree as well. Julia.
Thanks, Hank. Thanks for your presentation. It was really good. I've just got a question about, and take what you said about when you get your reviews back, you should be open to suggestions and recommendations. Not AJET, but other journals we see have been reviewed by AI, or people using AI in those reviews. What's your approach to that? Because sometimes it just seems like they literally haven't read the paper, they just haven't understood, or they've actually said that you've used a different methodology from what's stated in the paper. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we explicitly state that you can't use AI to review.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sometimes it's very obvious, and then we just discard the review, like we don't use it.
Yeah.
There was one fairly early on actually that was just like enormous review, and it just had like suggestions for every sentence in the paper essentially. Like it was like it's crazy. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I ended
you
up
don't
going
see
back
them
to the
often, but
yeah. I
So,
ended up going back to the editor and saying,
so
sorry,
Ju-
like, can you please send this out to a review again?
mm,
Because it just doesn't seem that a human has actually looked at this.
and
yeah.
that's the right approach
Okay.
as well.
There,
Yeah.
there is a funny flip side to that though. Um, yeah. Oh, actually, should I say this? Well,
Go on, you can't not say it now.
well, yeah. I mean, this was for another journal that I was working for, that I did some work for, where yeah, it was very clear that the whole process was kind of entirely governed by AI, so even the conversations you were having with the editor, I was like, no, this isn't a real person that I'm talking to. It was bizarre. It was almost surreal, because there is something really human about getting a a a review that even a brutal one, and I've been on my fair share of brutal reviews. But there's
Mm,
something really human about it. But you can tell straight away when it's AI
Mm.
generated. Yeah.
And Julia, what
yeah.
happens in like at least AJ, that once you review, and if we read the review and we feel like, that's AI generated, so we have internal system. Probably, Hank, they don't see it, but we rate the reviewers.
Yes.
So let's say you are the reviewer, you who submitted the review, I read the review, and I put stars, so 1 to 5 stars. So if I put 1 star, my other colleagues, my other co-associate editors would know that
Mm.
I haven't rated you, or whoever hasn't rated you very well. That means the review quality is very weak. So then you are less likely to get uh, more reviews allocated to you. So there is like,
Because the weird thing about that as well is that I don't really know why people do that. Like, you, because there's no benefit in
mm,
reviewing as such. Like, there's no
mm,
real benefit in beyond, what we've discussed here. So there's no kind of career advancement. It doesn't
mm,
matter if you review 4 papers a year or 20. Like, no one's going to give you more benefit as a result. So I don't really know why people do it. Like that, there was one reviewer in AJET that I accidentally stumbled upon who submitted the exact same review for 2 different papers. And I totally accidentally, because I thought I've read this before. And then I kind of looked it up, and yeah, it was the exact same review. And I thought, like, so, I've just removed that person from the system, but because it's crazy. Like, why would you do that?
I mean, potentially AI can be used to soften that review,
Mm.
the comment that you give back, because so often they are harsh. So maybe that's a good use of it, just like with giving students feedback on their assessments instead of critical. You say, "Oh, this is nice, well done for that."
Yeah. The review wasn't very good, guys, and it was in the first place. And there had been some issues with that reviewer before, so it's kind of like it was part of a pattern. I
It's just
know, like
so
because it could be
wild.
an accident, but it was just a bit nuts.
Uh,
So
Yeah.
and
yeah.
Hank, I didn't tell you, but mm, I was to discuss this in our next associate editor meeting. But what I see, for example, lately that um, from particular institute, you see like so many new reviewers they've registered. So somebody in that institution said, "Oh, being reviewer is blah blah blah," without knowing much about what review entails and all of that. And you see like lots and lots of people from the same institution coming up as reviewer in your in our review system, because there is nothing, no approval system. It's no filters. It's just people go in and
Mm.
put their details in, and then I think you guys like just approve or
We've
not approve, is it?
Yes, we do, but we do go through. That's why we have to go. We don't because there's quite a lot of there's a lot of associate editors that ask us, "Oh, can you add this person? Can you add this person as a reviewer?" Because then they know that they're going to get accepted. But we do vet them, so we do have to. We get them to fill out a little form, and then we do
Mm.
check their backgrounds and whether they have enough experience, and we don't always accept them. The reason for this is that there's been a few situations where basically cartels, as you might call them. So there are associate editors who assign reviewers to papers of friends, and they get accepted in this way, right? And it's not hard. Like, given the amount, like the volumes that we're dealing with, it's very easy for that to kind of not get detected for quite a long time. But there's a real danger of it because there's a lot of pressure, as you all know, there's a lot of pressure amongst academics to publish. And if you get like a situation like that set up, you get a few publications out of that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
they do that with PhDs as well, don't they? I've heard of
mhm,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
Can I tell another funny story? See, I for another journal that I'm an associate editor for, we turned down a paper after the first round of reviews. And, fair enough, it didn't deserve it, right? It didn't deserve to be published. But the lead author, the corresponding author, sent a copy of the transcript that they had with Copilot or something, highlighting the features of the paper, saying it should be accepted. And they showed me how they brought in the journal's requirements and scope and all of those kinds of things, and
Mhm,
basically said, "No, your reviewers are wrong. This paper should be accepted." And I was like, "Wow, what do we do there?"
mhm.
I forwarded that one on to the editor in chief and said, "Can you deal with this because it's way above my pay grade?"
And so you are still on the editorial panel on in this journal?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh,
Mm.
I
It
would.
was rejected. The editor in chief was like, "This is just," the editor in chief fully affirmed the decision made by the reviewers. The co-pilot transcript was, well, it wasn't slop, but it wasn't very good.
Mm. Yeah. Linda, Linda Corin, she religiously follows Retraction Watch, which is where papers that have been published that turn out to be fraudulent in some kind of way. And that's become exponential growth as well. There's crazy amount of papers that get published and then it turns out they shouldn't have been because they're either plagiarized or there's something wrong with them. Yeah. Sandhya.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, for someone starting in research, in today's world, AI is inevitable. Like, we have to use it. So, how can we maintain the research integrity and keeping the use of AI in mind? Like, we cannot completely deny it.
No, you don't have to deny it either, but you have to just be explicit about how you've used it. And most like it's interesting. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago, and Taylor and Francis journals now require you to have an AI statement for any article that you submit, including if you haven't used it, and then you have to justify why you haven't used it, which is really odd. But yeah, so they just want you to say you have or you haven't used it. But the main thing is like yourself, if you've written it
Yeah.
yourself, you also know yourself if you've done the research yourself, if you've done the analysis yourself. If you've written the paper and you think like, oh, I just want to make this a bit more readable, it's perfectly fine to use AI tools to make that more readable. I should say though, however, that it doesn't always improve it. Because AI has a bit of a funny way of making things quite bland.
Yeah.
So that they sound good, but they're not very pleasant to read always. If you know what I mean. But yeah, there's nothing, you don't have to worry too much about that. As long as you kind of, if you know yourself that it's genuine research, you've written the paper, you've just used it to make some adjustments here and there, it's perfectly fine. Just say exactly what you've done to do that, and that will be accepted.
And in the end, Sandhya, what happens is that whatever you write under your name as a research and it is published, then it is your responsibility. So, and it's your name. So, for example, if I write several papers that is like with AI or whatever, and I'm very sure people read and they find out, then I will lose my credibility, right?
Right.
So in the end, what you would like to do is that keep your credibility, and so whatever you do, use AI, not use AI, it's in the end your responsibility. And so declaration is just the way of for the journal to kind of like maintain the integrity, but then it is more up to your responsibility to maintain your own credibility because it's your work, because you are telling it out the world that it's your work.
Thank you, Cass.
I'll give you
You
one
go.
very quick
Yep.
example because it's directly relevant, and yeah, it's interesting. In the Journal for Academic Development, we had a paper a couple of months ago that I was reading it and I thought this is an AI paper, surely, like this reads like an AI paper, Then when I got to the end, there was a statement that said the translation tools that I had used, and it was written in French. And so they used the translation tool to turn it into an English paper. And so, which is kind of nice because it makes publishing more inclusive. I like it when people can write in their own language. But it does then mean that, yeah, I don't know, that we had a bit of a discussion and we decided to accept that.
Okay, I'm going to end up this wonderful discussion. I think there's such wonderful discussions. I think surely in the next couple of weeks, couple of months in NASCLite, we're more than happy to have more of these discussions. But thank you so much, Hank, for sharing this. It's opened up,
Very welcome. Thanks
a lot of
for
questions
inviting
around this.
me.
Quite an informal chat. Quite a lot of interesting area. But thank you so much, and looking forward to the editor, how to write proper titles, etc. I think that sounds like an interesting session, etc. on
It's
that.
fun to read as well because it has some
absolutely. Thank you so
funny
much.
titles.
Thank you everybody for joining us here today.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Thank you.
Okay, so the recording will be available like by evening on YouTube, ASCII YouTube channel.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.